All right, this is fantastic. Thank you all for being here today. We're getting to an opportunity to share and talk about Turtel Onli, founder of the Black Age, creator of Rhythmism, founder of BAG. We're going to talk a little bit about it all, and we have some fantastic guests here. Let's bring to the stage Joe Curry. Woo! Comic writer. We have Jibba Anderson. Jibba. Woo! Comic creator as well. We have Floyd. Yeah. Woo! Coming to the stage, and we have Stanford Carpenter. Floyd, and also we have D-Nick, who just performed. Thank you, D-Nick. So Floyd is coming to the stage, and he is new Turtel in his earlier years as a formulative creative. We're going to get to ask him a couple questions about that. Floyd Webb is also I would say, innovating Afrofuturist film curator. And we have Stanford Carpenter, who's a cultural anthropologist. Everyone here on the stage today has had an opportunity to talk about, to work with Turtel, to be inspired by Turtel. And I am more than honored to be able to share and talk to all of you guys about him. I'm trying to stand up here and hold the page open where I wrote about Turtel, but I can get back to that later. So we have a microphone here. I'm going to move this microphone over for you all to share. So just quickly here, Turtel Onli has inspired many comic book conventions. He started the Black Age in comics, but he also inspired conventions in Atlanta, Detroit, Philadelphia, and inspired and worked with Elgin in supporting PocketCon as well. And while we're all excited about comics today, and there's this big Blur community, this community of fans who are of color and people creating comic characters of color, it wasn't always like that. And Turtel played a formulative role in creating community. And just to start off, wanted to ask you guys a couple, just ask you, if you were to describe Turtel to someone who didn't know him, how would you describe him? And I'll start with you, D-Nick.
Righteously combative.
That's a great description.
Timeless.
Creatively unstoppable.
Okay, creatively unstoppable. Somebody come and help us.
Yes. I mean, I thought I had a big enough mouth anyway.
Check.
How can I describe him? Tireless.
I think Jibba just took mine. I was going to say crazy persistent. Pretty much that. If you ever was in a room with him, you understand what that meant. So, yeah.
Right, so Turtel came of age in the Black Arts movement. One of the first organizations that he put together was one called BAG, the Black Artists Guild. And it was a collective of artists coming together, late 60s, early 70s. They were comparable to Afrocobra, who's documented extensively. And it was all about creating empowered Black images. And I think it's interesting to note that they were really celebrating or trying to create both a Black aesthetic and an aesthetic to show empowered Black people living their daily lives. And with that, with that, Floyd, I just want to ask you, like, some of your memories of Turtel in those early years.
Well, the first argument we got into was over the name BAG. Because when I was in college,
Hold your mic a little closer.
Yeah, when I was I moved here in 1978, and I met Turtel in 70. In about 78. And the first argument I remember we had was over the name BAG, because I had an organization at Northern Illinois University called BAG, and then there was another organization down in St. Louis called BAG, and so who was going to get the bag, right? So that's where we started. I met him at Oshun Gallery that was run by Yonde Olu, and that's when I first saw Nog, you know. There's a period that, you know, because I was back and forth. I was like traveling a lot back then. And I know he turned up in Paris at one point, and he had something to do with this fashion designer, Patrick Kelly.
Patrick Kelly's a big deal in fashion.
Yeah. And there was a magazine called Zoom. And one day I was looking around for something, and I saw Nog in Zoom magazine. So when I came back to Chicago, I said, man, I didn't know you were in Paris. And he said, yeah, I was there, and I left. And he was back here doing it. Plus, he started, we had a studio on 14th and Michigan called Progressive Arts Center. His office for BAG was right across the street from us. I think we were on 14th and Michigan. He was on 15th and Michigan, you know.
And what year was that approximately?
That was about 79, 80.
Okay.
This was right before the cartoon, before Nog turned up as a cartoon in the Defender newspaper. It was a comic strip before it was a comic book, you know. And so that was, you know, that's what I remember about those first years we all shared, you know.
Right, and then Stanford, you wrote a tribute article about Turtel, and in his early years, he was very much influenced by his grandfather, who was a minister. And can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think in your article you mentioned how his grandfather used visuals, which is a little different from some church communities.
Yeah, well his grandfather would they would do, I mean, be oil on board, and they would actually create. You're right, essentially create visuals to go with the sermons. And Turtel would talk about how like you know, being raised by his grandparents, that he would just sit there and just kind of watch in awe, and then he would join in, and then that would go on to influence his going, you know, how he approached art going forward.
Wonderful. And then for both of you, Jibba and Joe, I want to ask you about a bit about those, you know, stories you remember, things you remember Turtel saying about the creation of the Black Age in comics, and why he decided to create it.
For me, first off, I came into the game in like '95, and that was 2 years after the original Black Age. So when I first got into the game, the artist I worked with, Daryl Spicy, he actually told me, you know, whatever you do, you got to go and see him, you know. And you got to talk to him. And I remember I tell the story a million times. It was like, you know, the Wizard of Oz. You got to go see him. So I found, you know, years later, I would actually finally meet him. And, you know, and right off the bat, like we weren't having those one-on-one conversations like we would eventually have, but just his general vibe of what he was trying to do and what he was trying to accomplish with the Black Age movement was just, you can feel it. It was coming off of him. So that was my impression. And like if you ever were in the room with him, you know, around him, he was always talking about that and organizing some form to push it forward. So, you know, those are some of the memories I have about him, and what I knew he was about pretty much through and through. So, yeah.
Yeah, so for me, kind of like Floyd, but definitely in the younger generation, I am not a Chicago native. I was born and raised in Detroit, and I moved here in '95 to go to grad school at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. At the same time, I was getting into the comic book game, and my introduction into the comic book game was through our mutual friend, all of us, Lamorris Richmond, who gave me my first gig. And Lamorris was the one who brought me into the comic book scene in Chicago. And one of the first people he had me meet was Turtel, right? And so, with Turtel, huge amount of respect. And I'm a young dude out of Detroit. I'm like, I'm a new cat, right? In the scene. So, I'm meeting Turtel, and I'm meeting the father of the Black Age. And what's interesting is that he didn't have that, say, aura of like, I'm the man and stuff like that. As I said, he was tireless. As I said, he was always working. He was always thinking. He was always hustling and figuring out ways to broaden the scope, widen the gap to get more of us together. He was about community from jump, right? And throughout the years that I had known him and in my development as a creator, I understood what he was thinking and what he was talking about in terms of community, and that influenced me heavily in my career and what I'm doing in the industry, especially the Black comics scene, and continuing on that sense of building and fomenting community amongst us.
Right, and I feel like that building of community was so central to what he was doing, because the Black Age was not about a brand just for Turtel. It was about a way of highlighting and getting Black creators to think about, to take their interest in comics or their desires to illustrate and tell stories and say, hey, you can publish your own. Because Turtel had a lot of experiences, both in Paris and both in America, trying to work with various design companies, illustration companies, and they were not particularly interested in either science fiction or what we call Afrofuturism. They weren't interested in Afrofuturism, what we're now calling Afrofuturism. And they weren't necessarily enthusiastic about seeing Black characters in general. And I was wondering if that's something you could speak to, just the value of the work that Turtel was doing in celebrating those characters, Floyd.
Well, to talk about that, we have to talk about Chicago and what's come out of Chicago, right? Chicago has always been a cultural hub. It's always been a place where the independent artist is on his own, right? When you look at, we can look at Sun Ra, but before Sun Ra, you got Fletcher Henderson and all these guys who came up from nothing, and Nat King Cole and all these people. Not only that, the organizations that supported them, right? At the same time that Turtel was developing BAG, the AACM was around, The
That's a
AACM,
jazz collective.
that's the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians. I went to their music school. They had a free music school. Matter of fact, when I was at Osun Galleries, one of the AACM groups, Kahil El Zubar and the Ethnic Heritage Ensemble, was playing at the gallery. So there's always been this kind of nexus between all of the arts. The thing that one of the members of the Art Ensemble of Chicago, Malachi Favors, told me, they had a musicians building, right? The musicians really had their shit together. They had a whole building that was started by the Black Musicians Union back in the 30s on Drexel in Hyde Park. And I used to go there, and I just go door to door, because all the musicians in there, because I was playing flute and I wanted to learn everything. And one day Malachi told me, he says, whatever you do with this, you can use anywhere in life. That this is that, but what you have to do is you carry a legacy. And Turtel was part of that legacy, because this was during the age of the Black, we had come out of Black Power movement into the Black Arts movement. The Black Power movement was still there, but the Black Arts movement became very powerful, because the arts, like especially right now in the state we're in, they're trying to erase us. It's now more important than ever to hit back with as much visual, with as much music, and as much alternative media, podcast, everything, because we can win. And that's the whole thing, and that's what drove Turtel, and that's what's driven all of us since we've been in this place. We came up under people like Hammurabi. There was this guy, a lay historian. If you go up to the library here, this dude did Black history calendars from the 1930s until he died, right? This man, he's the one who introduced us to Egypt. He was a friend of J.A. Rogers, J.A. Rogers was a historian who had all of his history stories illustrated by cartoonists. Those were the cartoons that ended up in they were syndicated to all of the black papers every week, you know.